The chair was removed before I could touch it. Not hurried, not apologetic. The server checked the seating chart one last time, then slid the chair backward. Metal scraped stone. He lifted it cleanly, as if correcting a surplus item, and carried it toward the wall. 12 place cards remained on the table. Heavy cardstock, centered, perfectly aligned with crystal glasses and folded linen. I counted them without meaning to. One by one, 12. My name wasn't there. No one spoke. The skyline pressed against the glass walls of the rooftop ballroom, fog smudging the lights below. Someone laughed, short, unsure, then stopped when no one followed. Matthew glanced at the empty space where my seat should have been. He didn't stand. He didn't look confused. He smiled the way he does when a meeting ends exactly as planned. "Oh," he said lightly, "I thought you'd understand. This dinner is for real family." I looked around the table. Eleanor was adjusting the clasp of her pearl necklace, eyes fixed on the orchids. Richard studied his water glass as if the answer might be written at the bottom. A cousin shifted in her seat, then deliberately turned away. No one asked where I was supposed to go. "So this is where you erase me," I said. The words didn't echo. They landed and stayed. A server reached for the place setting that had been half prepared in front of me. Napkin, bread plate, unopened bottle of mineral water, and cleared it away with the chair. The space filled immediately. Clean, efficient, as if I had never been scheduled. I stepped back. Once. Then again. Careful not to brush the table. The band paused, then restarted with a softer tempo. A toast was poured for Eleanor. Someone clapped. I walked out. The corridor to the elevators was lined with framed photographs of the city. At the far end, my reflection caught up with me in the mirrored doors. Navy silk, steady posture, hands shaking badly enough that I had to press them flat against my thighs. The elevator arrived in 11 seconds. I counted. Inside, the doors closed without hesitation. At 7:42 p.m., my phone vibrated. One missed call. Then another. I didn't answer. I watched the floor numbers descend and focused on keeping my shoulders level. By the time I reached the lobby, the noise upstairs had normalized. Laughter, glassware, the low murmur of people congratulating themselves for a night proceeding smoothly. That was when it settled. The missing chair wasn't a mistake. It wasn't cruelty either. It was procedure. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I pulled my coat tighter and opened the notes app on my phone. Time, location, number of seats. I typed without emotion, the way I always do when something needs to be documented accurately. Traffic moved. A rideshare idled at the curb. A couple argued quietly near the door. Nothing had changed, except a decision had been finalized. I stepped into the glass corridor and let the doors close behind me. The sound changed immediately. Inside the ballroom, glasses chimed and cutlery tapped porcelain in practiced rhythms. Out here, the city breathed. Distant traffic, the low hum of wind pushing fog along the edge of the bay. The lights below looked flattened, like a map. I walked toward the elevators without hurrying. No one followed. Not a hand on my arm. Not a whisper of my name. That absence mattered. It told me more than anything said at the table. They expected a pattern, a return, a visible crack. They expected time to work for them. At the elevator bank, I stopped in front of the mirrored doors. The reflection was precise enough to inventory. Navy silk, still smooth at the seams. Hair pinned where it should be. Lipstick intact. The only discrepancy was my hands. They shook when I raised them to press the down arrow. I waited until the tremor eased, then pressed again. One light, one direction. The elevator indicator blinked. I watched the numbers descend from the floor above. The wait felt longer than it was. I focused on breathing evenly, 4 counts in, 6 out, because that's how you keep a line steady when your pen wants to skid. No footsteps approached. No apologies floated down the hall. The dinner continued upstairs, now confident enough to proceed without checking the margins. The doors opened. I stepped inside alone. As the elevator began to move, my phone vibrated once, then twice. The screen lit briefly against the mirrored walls. I didn't look. I turned the phone face down and slid it into my coat pocket. I knew who it would be. I knew the order they would call in. Matthew first, then Eleanor, then someone tasked with sounding reasonable. The descent took 23 seconds. I counted them because counting keeps you from revising history. In the lobby, a hotel associate smiled and asked if I needed assistance. I said no. My voice didn't rise. It didn't fall. It sounded the way it always does when a decision has already been logged. Outside, the cold cut cleanly. I stood beneath the awning and waited for the car I'd ordered earlier. Habit, not foresight. While I waited, I took out my phone and opened the Notes app again. I added a line under the entry I'd made minutes before. No adjectives, just facts. Timestamps, names present, seating count, witnesses. I scrolled back through earlier entries. There were more than I remembered. Small things, dates, revisions, emails forwarded to myself because they didn't belong anywhere else yet. A message marked final that had arrived after midnight and replaced a version I'd approved. A seating chart attachment with a last-minute update time-stamped 6:58 p.m. I didn't feel surprised reading it. I felt oriented. The car arrived. I gave the driver an address and watched the city slide past. At a red light, my phone vibrated again. Then again. I let it ring out. On the third attempt, I answered without greeting. "Where are you?" Matthew asked. The sound behind his voice told me he'd stepped away from the table. The band was louder now, covering the disruption. "I left," I said. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "We can fix it." "I've documented it," I replied. "That's all." He started to speak. I ended the call. At 8:11 p.m., I forwarded the seating chart to an email address I don't use often. At 8:14, I attached the contract writer and highlighted the clause that governs sponsor guarantees. At 8:19, I sent a single line to my attorney. "There's been a material deviation. Please advise on next steps." The car crossed Market Street. The driver turned the radio down without being asked. We rode the rest of the way in quiet. When I got home, I hung my coat, poured a glass of water, and set the phone on the counter. The screen lit once more, then went dark. Upstairs, a dinner was still being served. Downstairs, a process had begun. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. The apartment looked the same in the dark, furniture where it had always been, the faint glow from the city leaking through the windows. I set my phone on the dining table, plugged it in, and watched the battery indicator climb. Outside, a bus hissed at the corner. Somewhere upstairs, a chair scraped. Ordinary sounds, stable reference points. At 8:27 p.m., an email arrived from Laura McKenna. No subject line, just a timestamp and one sentence. "Send me the contracts." I sat down and opened the folder I'd labeled neutrally, Events/Q4. Inside were subfolders named by date and location. Tonight's dinner sat between a corporate retreat in Napa and a pharmaceutical launch in Palo Alto. The file names were unremarkable. That was the point. My name appears on the first page of the venue agreement. Claire Donovan, age 35. Title: Strategic Risk and Event Consultant. The signature block follows the boilerplate, clean and legible, with the same pen pressure I use on every document. The counter-signature belongs to the hotel's director of operations. Eleanor's name doesn't appear anywhere. Neither does Matthew's. I forwarded the agreement as a PDF, then the escrow confirmation. The account is held at a regional bank I've used for years because they process reversals within 2 business hours if the authorization chain is intact. Tonight's balance reflected 3 deposits and 1 guarantee rider, all time-stamped and cross-referenced. I attached the rider last. Clause 7.4. Material deviation. Sponsor withdrawal. Suspension of service. At 8:34, Laura replied with a single word. Received. I poured the water I'd set aside earlier and drank it standing up. The glass was chipped at the rim. I made a note to replace it. My hands were steady enough to type. People assume the work I do is decorative. Centerpieces, lighting, seating charts. They don't see the layers underneath. The insurance requirements, the liability caps, the payment schedules that exist to keep failure contained. I learned early that elegance is just structure with the seams hidden. I've spent 15 years doing this. I know how events fail, and I know who gets blamed when they do. That's why my contracts are written the way they are. That's why my name goes where it does. Not for recognition, for control. At 8:41, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Eleanor. I let it ring until the screen went dark, then added her call to the log. Name, time, duration, 0 seconds. I opened the seating chart attachment from earlier and compared versions. The original listed 13 seats. My name sat between Matthew and a donor from Seattle. The updated version, sent at 6:58 p.m., listed 12. The metadata confirmed the edit. Same file, different count. I didn't annotate it. I didn't speculate. I saved both versions and named them clearly. By 8:53, I had assembled a packet. Contracts, confirmations, call logs, emails, attachments. No commentary, just sequence. I uploaded it to a secure drive and shared access with Laura. The system confirmed receipt with a green checkmark. I checked the calendar. Tomorrow was clear. The day after that had a tentative hold. I released it. At 9:07, another message came through from Matthew. I didn't open it. The preview was enough. I turned off the phone and set it face down. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. I wiped the counter, aligned the chairs, and carried the empty glass to the sink. Every signature keeping that night alive had been mine. I went upstairs, changed into a t-shirt, and placed the navy dress carefully on a hanger. The silk had held its shape, so had I. Before bed, I set an alarm for the morning and placed the folder by the door. Outside, the city kept moving. Upstairs, a dinner was finishing its last course. Elsewhere, the paperwork was already doing what it was designed to do. The paperwork finished its work quietly. While it moved through inboxes and servers overnight, I slept. In the morning, I woke at 6:10 a.m., showered, dressed, and made coffee the way I always do. 2 scoops, no sugar, mug warmed first. The routine mattered. It kept the timeline intact. As the kettle cooled, older details surfaced, not as memories, but as records finally making sense. The Ashfords liked to describe themselves as discreet. Old routes, old contracts, shipping lanes their grandfather had secured before zoning laws hardened, investments layered across logistics, warehousing, port services, industries that move things without being seen, money that didn't announce itself. Eleanor ran the family the same way. She never raised her voice. She never contradicted anyone directly. She controlled through scheduling, through access, through what was discussed and what simply wasn't. When meetings happened, they were framed as casual, breakfasts, walks, brief stops in offices I was never invited into. At first, I assumed it was courtesy. Then I noticed the pattern. Board meetings scheduled during my confirmed travel windows. Family strategy lunches added after I'd already committed to clients. Decisions finalized before the questions were ever circulated. When I asked later, Matthew would summarize in broad strokes, leaving out numbers, names, timelines. It was routine, he'd say. Nothing you needed to worry about. Eleanor used a different language. You're such a help, she told her friends. Claire handles the logistics so beautifully. Support. Logistics. Details. Never family. At holiday gatherings, I was seated beside spouses who had married in recently. At charity events, I was introduced without a last name. When checks were discussed, the conversation shifted rooms. I learned to notice when the tone changed. Voices lowered, chairs angled inward, the subtle tightening of a circle I wasn't meant to enter. Once, during a dinner in Palo Alto, I reached for a document folder Eleanor had left on the credenza. She took it from my hands gently, smiling. "Oh, not that one," she said. "That's for Richard." I stepped back. The folder disappeared. The evening continued. Another time, I overheard my name in the hallway outside Matthew's office. Eleanor's voice was calm, precise. "She's excellent at execution," she said, "but she's not permanent." The words stayed. Permanent. It wasn't an insult. It was a classification. Over the years, small things accumulated. Calendar invites rescinded, emails forwarded after decisions were made, drafts labeled final that arrived with signatures already attached. "You see too much structure," she told me once, pouring tea. "Families don't work that way." But families did work that way. At least this one did. I began to keep copies, not because I felt wronged, but because my work required it. I archived versions, saved attachments, logged revisions. The habit was professional, not defensive. Or so I told myself. By the time the missing chair appeared, the record already existed. That morning, as I rinsed the mug and set it upside down to dry, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. One line. "Their counsel is asking for clarification." I typed back, "All materials are complete. Refer them to the originals." I sat at the table and opened my laptop. The folder by the door remained untouched. I didn't need to add anything. The sequence spoke for itself. Eleanor had always believed control came from deciding who belonged in the room. She never considered what happened when someone stopped waiting to be invited. I closed the laptop, picked up my keys, and left the apartment. Outside, the morning fog thinned as the sun climbed higher. Behind me, years of quiet exclusions finally aligned into a single, legible pattern. Ahead of me, the process continued, steady, procedural, and already out of reach. The pattern from earlier years didn't end with seating charts and closed meetings. It extended into places I hadn't thought to inventory until the night the chair disappeared. 2 days after the dinner, Laura forwarded me a system-generated log from the shared drive. Access history, timestamps, IP addresses. One entry stood out, not because it was recent, but because it wasn't. A document labeled personal, travel, had been opened repeatedly over the past 14 months. Not by me. I recognized the file. I had created it the year before as a placeholder, a habit from work. Blank folders attract less attention than gaps. I opened it. Inside were airline confirmations, hotel receipts, and calendar holds that didn't align with any client's schedule. The names repeated. Cities overlapped. Boston, Chicago, Aspen. A pattern disguised as coincidence. I didn't confront Matthew. I checked his phone instead. It was charging on the counter when I got home that evening, screen dark, notifications muted. I hadn't looked through his phone in years. There was no need to rush. I unplugged it, opened the Messages app, and searched for a name I'd seen twice already in the travel records. Madeline Brooks. The thread was archived, not deleted. That mattered. Archived conversations leave timestamps intact. The earliest message dated back 13 months. A short exchange about a dinner that worked better than expected. Then a gap. Then logistics. Flights booked last minute. Rooms handled. A note about keeping things clean until everything is ready. I scrolled without pausing. There were photographs, not explicit, not sentimental. Hotel mirrors, balcony railings, 2 glasses on a table. Metadata attached to each image placed them squarely inside the windows Matthew had described to me as work travel. The same weekends Eleanor had insisted I stay behind because family needed privacy. I took screenshots. I forwarded them to myself. I returned the phone to the counter and plugged it back in exactly where it had been. At 9:16 p.m., I received an email from Eleanor. The subject line read, "Next steps." The body contained 3 sentences. Polite, vague. It suggested clarity and alignment. It ended with, "We all want what's best for everyone involved." Attached was a seating proposal for an upcoming charity gala. Madeline's name appeared beside Matthew's. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a public corporate filing and searched Madeline Brooks's name. It took less than a minute. Her father sat on the board of a logistics firm that had recently entered a joint venture with the Ashfords. The timeline matched the messages. So did the travel. I added the filing to the folder. By midnight, I had a clean sequence. Messages, travel records, attachments, corporate ties. None of it required interpretation. It read the way contracts do when the margins line up. At 12:07 a.m., Matthew texted, "We should talk." I didn't answer. The next morning, I met Laura in her office. We reviewed the materials without commentary. She asked only one question: how long I thought it had been happening. "Long enough to plan around," I said. She nodded and made a note. On the walk home, I stopped at a corner cafe and ordered coffee. While I waited, I watched a couple argue quietly near the register. Their voices stayed low. No one intervened. The barista called out a name. When my cup was ready, I took it to the window and stood there until the steam faded. This marriage hadn't been failing. It had been replaced. And the replacement had been coordinated carefully, with everyone informed except the person whose name still appeared on the legal documents. I finished the coffee, set the cup down, and pulled out my phone. I opened the folder again, not to add anything, but to confirm the order. Everything was already in place. I left the cafe and walked back into the street, traffic moving steadily around me, a decision quietly finalizing in real time. By the time the coffee cup was empty and the folder confirmed, the sequence felt complete. What remained was not discovery, but context. The context had started the morning of the dinner. I woke early that day, before Matthew, before the city shifted into its weekday rhythm. At 6:18 a.m., I was already dressed, moving through the hotel suite with the quiet efficiency that comes from years of pre-event routines. The garment bag hung untouched, shoes aligned, phone charged to 92%. The schedule printed and folded once, then again to fit the pocket of my coat. I stepped into the hallway to make a call to the venue coordinator and stopped when I heard Eleanor's voice. She was standing by the window at the end of the corridor, back turned, phone pressed to her ear. The glass reflected her profile cleanly, posture straight, shoulders relaxed, the look she used when something had already been settled. I hadn't meant to listen. I hadn't meant to pause, but the hallway carried sound. 12 seats only, she said. Not sharply, not quietly, just precisely. There was a pause. I could hear the faint echo of another voice through the receiver, distorted and deferential. "Yes," Eleanor continued. "She'll leave on her own." Another pause. She adjusted the bracelet at her wrist, the same small motion I'd seen her use when moving a conversation forward without resistance. "Make it dignified." The call ended. She turned, saw me, and smiled. The smile didn't change shape. It didn't need to. She asked if I'd slept well. I said yes. We walked in opposite directions. At 6:41 a.m., I added a note to my phone. Time, location, exact phrasing, no interpretation. At breakfast, nothing was out of place. Matthew read the news on his tablet. Eleanor commented on the weather. Richard asked about traffic near the venue. I confirmed arrival times and staffing counts. The plan held. The chair was never meant to be missing by accident. It was meant to disappear cleanly, in front of witnesses who would later describe it as unfortunate but unavoidable. A misunderstanding. A numbers issue. Something that resolved itself once the non-essential element removed itself from the room. The brilliance of it was procedural. No raised voices, no confrontation, no scene. just an absence that rewrote the narrative. I thought about that as the day progressed, about how often dignity is used as a cover for removal, about how many exits are framed as voluntary because the door was open just wide enough for someone to step through alone. By the time evening arrived, the decision had already been rehearsed. I was there to validate it. At 7:02 p.m., the seating chart was updated. At 7:14, the place cards were printed. At 7:28, the final count was confirmed with service staff. Every step documented, every change signed off by someone who was not me. When the chair was pulled away, it completed a process that had begun long before anyone sat down. I didn't interrupt it. I let it finish. Later, standing in my apartment, I replayed Eleanor's words not as dialogue, but as instruction. 12 seats, self-removal, dignity, each one a control mechanism disguised as courtesy. I opened the folder again and added a single audio note. The file was labeled by date and time only. It contained no commentary, just the memory of a voice in a hallway, measured and unafraid. I saved it. I backed it up. I closed the file. Outside, the city settled into night. Somewhere across town, a dinner was ending with applause and speeches that would be remembered selectively. In my kitchen, I rinsed the coffee cup and placed it on the rack to dry. The chair had been removed to avoid a scandal. What followed would not be avoidable. What followed Eleanor's hallway call was not a confrontation. It was a window. I recognized it the moment the chair was removed. A narrow interval where assumptions do the work for you, where everyone believes the outcome is settled and stops checking the mechanics underneath. I waited until the elevator doors closed behind me. At 7:49 p.m., standing beneath the awning outside the hotel, I opened the banking app tied to the escrow account. The interface was familiar. Clean columns, confirmation prompts, a two-step authorization that requires deliberate movement. I didn't rush. I verified the account number, then the event ID. The balance reflected exactly what it should. Venue deposit, catering advance, contingency buffer. All funds sourced from my firm's operating line. I selected freeze disbursements. The system asked for a reason code. I chose material deviation, authorization chain broken. It required a timestamp and a brief description. I entered neither narrative nor justification, just the clause reference. The app confirmed the action at 7:51 p.m. with a neutral green check. Next, the payment guarantee. The rider sat as an attachment to the master contract, a document no one reads unless something goes wrong. I opened it, scrolled to the termination section, and toggled Withdraw Sponsor Guarantee. Another confirmation screen, another checkmark. 7:54 p.m. The last step took longer. Event insurance requires an agent override. I dialed the number I keep saved under initials only. When the call connected, I identified myself, verified the policy number, and requested cancellation effective immediately due to breach of declared conditions. There was a pause on the line, keyboard sounds, a question about documentation. "I'll upload the supporting file within the hour," I said. "That will be sufficient," the agent replied. The policy status updated at 7:59 p.m. I ended the call and stood still long enough to feel the cold seep through the soles of my shoes. Inside the ballroom, the first course would be clearing, wine being poured, speeches warming up. No alarms yet. These systems don't scream, they notify. At 8:03, an automated alert triggered. Guarantee status, inactive. It went to the venue's internal finance queue. At 8:06, a second alert followed. Insurance coverage flagged as void. At 8:08, the system locked new service authorizations pending review. I didn't receive those notifications. I knew they were coming because I built timelines around them before. The venue cannot legally continue a high-capacity, insured event once coverage lapses, not without assuming personal liability. Managers know this. So do finance directors. It's why the process exists. At 8:11, My phone vibrated. I didn't look. At 8:13, it vibrated again. I set it face down on the stone ledge beside me and watched the reflection of the ballroom lights flicker in the glass. I wasn't canceling anything. I was removing myself from the chain that made it possible. By 8:17, the internal escalation would have reached the duty manager. By 8:20, finance would be asking who had authority to restore coverage. By 8:22, someone would realize the answer wasn't sitting at the table. At 8:24, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. "What did you do?" Matthew asked. His voice carried distance now, no music, no laughter. "I documented a deviation," I said, and I stepped away. "You can't do this," he said. "I didn't attack them," I replied. "I just stepped away." The call ended without resolution. I ordered a car and waited while traffic slid past, steady and indifferent. When it arrived, I gave the driver my address and sat back as the city moved around us. At a red light, I checked the time. 8:31 p.m. Somewhere above us, a dinner was discovering its limits. Here, in the back seat, the work was already finished. By the time the car emerged back into traffic, the systems upstairs had caught up. I didn't need updates to know when it happened. There's a pause that follows a trigger, 5 to 7 minutes, while managers confirm they're reading the same alert. Then movement. Phones out, chairs pushed back, the rhythm of a room changing without permission. At 8:36 p.m., my phone rang again. I didn't answer. I watched the signal bars dip as we passed under an overpass, then return. The city kept time better than people do. Inside the ballroom, Jonathan Pierce approached the table from the service corridor, not the main floor. He carries himself the way finance directors do when something has crossed from inconvenience into exposure. His tablet was held low, screen angled away from guests. He stopped beside Eleanor's chair and waited for a lull that didn't come. He leaned in anyway. The request was procedural. Immediate settlement or suspension of service pending reinstatement of coverage. No accusation, no raised voice, just options presented in the order the system requires. Eleanor's hand tightened around her pearls. The clasp pressed into her thumb. She didn't look at Jonathan at first. She looked at the centerpiece, then at the glass in front of her, as if recalibrating the room. Richard lowered his eyes. He didn't ask questions. He knew what a lapse meant. Across the table, someone laughed too loudly, then stopped when the staff didn't respond. Plates waited. Wine went unpoured. The band hesitated, then continued, softer than before. Jonathan repeated the options. Matthew stood this time. His chair scraped the floor, the same sound the missing chair had made earlier, only sharper. He stepped away from the table and pulled his phone out. When he called, he didn't bother lowering his voice. "Where are you?" he said. I answered before the second ring ended. "You're humiliating us," he said. The word landed cleanly, like it had been practiced. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I know exactly what it looks like," I said. "This is my mother's night," he said. "Fix it." "You humiliated me first," I replied. There was silence on the line. Not the kind that waits for reassurance. The kind that checks whether leverage still exists. Behind him, Jonathan stood still, tablet dark now, waiting for authorization that hadn't arrived. A server hovered with a tray, unsure whether to clear or serve. Eleanor whispered something to Richard without turning her head. Matthew spoke again, lower. "What do you want?" "I stepped away," I said. "That's all." "You can't just walk out of responsibilities," he said. "I didn't," I said. "I documented a deviation and removed myself from the guarantee." "That's the same thing," he said. "It isn't," I replied. The call ended without agreement. At 8:42, another alert would have been issued, internal escalation to senior management. At 8:45, the venue's council would be notified. These are not dramatic moments. They are checkboxes moving forward. I imagined the table from a distance, Eleanor's smile fixed in place too long, Richard nodding without committing, guests pretending not to notice their glasses going empty, the room shrinking as it realized it no longer controlled the exit. The car stopped at a light. A pedestrian crossed in front of us, phone pressed to their ear, arguing about something that didn't matter. The driver adjusted the mirror. At 8:49, my phone rang again. I didn't answer. I turned it face down and rested my hands in my lap. They were steady now. Above us, service would slow, then stop. Someone would suggest moving to speeches early. Someone else would propose an alternate arrangement. None of it would resolve the missing authorization. The dinner would end without a scene. That was the point. The collapse wasn't loud. It was administrative. When the light changed, the car moved forward. I watched the city pass, indifferent and intact. What had been arranged to remove me quietly was now rearranging itself without asking. There was nothing left for me to do. By the time the car pulled to the curb, the calls had changed tone. The first ones were demands. The next were questions. The last came with conditions. I didn't answer until I was inside my apartment, shoes off, keys placed in the dish by the door. The clock on the oven read 9:18 p.m. I poured a glass of water and set it on the counter, untouched. When the phone rang again, I answered. Matthew didn't speak right away. I could hear movement, doors opening and closing, a low murmur behind him that sounded like instructions being given without certainty. We can make this right, he said finally. Whatever this is, we can settle it. I waited. There's money, he added. We'll compensate you for tonight, for the inconvenience. We'll put something in writing. I've already documented tonight, I said. That's not what I mean, he said. I mean a clean exit, dignified. You don't have to be dragged through anything. Dragged was a careful word. It implied force. It implied risk. I'm listening, I said. There would be an agreement, he continued. Non-disclosure, mutual. We protect the family, you walk away without damage. No one needs to know details. He paused, then lowered his voice. You could keep your reputation intact. At the counter, the glass of water caught the light from the hallway. I watched a bead of condensation slide down the side and pool at the base. I don't need protection, I said. That's not realistic, he replied. You know how this works. I do, I said. That's why I'm not negotiating. He exhaled sharply. Then what do you want? I picked up the phone and switched to speaker. With my other hand, I opened the folder on the table and slid the top document free. It was the escrow summary, printed earlier that afternoon. Clean margins, clear figures. I don't want compensation, I said. I want separation. Silence stretched. Somewhere behind him, a voice asked a question he didn't answer. You're making a mistake, he said. This can still be handled quietly. It already is, I replied. He started to speak again, faster now, stacking promises the way people do when leverage is slipping. A revised settlement, a timeline, an introduction to counsel who could smooth things over. I interrupted him once. My attorney already has the file, I said. What file? He asked. All of it, I replied. Contracts, guarantees, the seating revisions, travel records, messages, the corporate filings linking Madeline's family to the new venture. Another pause. This one was different. He didn't fill it. Laura McKenna received the packet earlier tonight, I added. She's reviewing it now. That's unnecessary, he said. It isn't, I said. The line went quiet long enough for me to hear him move to another room. A door closed. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Controlled. measured. "You're going to regret this," he said. I looked at the document in front of me, then at the time on my phone. 9:27 p.m. "I've logged everything," I said. "There's nothing left to resolve between us." He said my name once, like a question. I didn't respond. When the call ended, I placed the phone face down and finished the water. It tasted flat. I rinsed the glass and set it in the rack. On the table, the folder remained open to the first page. I closed it carefully and returned it to its place. Outside, a siren passed and faded. The building settled into its usual nighttime sounds, pipes ticking, an elevator moving somewhere above. The negotiation had failed because it was never meant to succeed. What they were offering required my silence. What I was choosing required only documentation. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs. The apartment went dark behind me, unchanged. The separation had already begun. Morning came without ceremony. At 6:02 a.m., my alarm went off. I turned it off on the first ring. The apartment was quiet in the way cities get before commuters decide the day has started. I dressed, gathered the folder from the table, and left it where it was. There was nothing left to add. By 6:38, I was walking along the Embarcadero. Fog rested low over the bay, softening the edges of the water and blurring the cranes across the pier. The air smelled like salt and wet concrete. A few runners passed me, shoes hitting pavement in steady intervals. A delivery truck idled near a loading dock, engine ticking as it cooled. The cafe opened at 7. I was the first customer. I ordered coffee, black, and took a seat by the window. The cup warmed my hands. Steam rose, then thinned. Outside, the fog shifted just enough to reveal the outline of the bridge before swallowing it again. At 7:14, my phone buzzed once. An email from Laura. No greeting, no commentary. 2 sponsors have withdrawn pending review. Venue confirms guarantee lapse. Counsel for Ashford Holdings requesting time. I closed the message and set the phone down. At 7:29, another notification arrived. A trade publication headline previewed on my screen. Logistics firm delays joint venture announcement. The subhead referenced unresolved compliance questions. I didn't open it. By 7:41, a third message came through, this time from an unfamiliar number. A brief text. We should pause public plans. No signature. I knew who had sent it. I finished the coffee and placed the cup on the saucer. The barista wiped the counter in slow, practiced strokes. Someone at the end of the bar laughed softly at their phone. At 8:03, Laura followed up with a single line. They're asking about settlement parameters. I replied with one sentence. Proceed with separation as outlined. There were consequences that didn't arrive all at once. They rarely do. Sponsors don't make announcements when they withdraw. They simply stop returning calls. Guarantees don't collapse publicly. They expire, and the absence does the work. Plans don't fail loudly. They stall. By mid-morning, 3 holds were released from my calendar. I let them go. At noon, I ate lunch alone and reviewed nothing. In the afternoon, a courier arrived with documents requiring acknowledgement. I signed where indicated and returned them in the envelope provided. That evening, the apartment looked the same as it had the night before. I hung my coat. I washed a single plate. The folder remained untouched. Somewhere across town, a family recalculated timelines. A venture adjusted its projections. A replacement arrangement waited longer than expected. None of that required my attention. Before bed, I stood by the window and watched the fog lift just enough to show the waterline. Boats moved slowly, lights steady, routes unchanged. They had taken my seat, so I took my life back.